So there are 5 confirmed unreleased songs from these sessions, and they were confirmed by Doane Perry in the 90s, back in the 90s. I remember reading where Doane said that one of the songs that was left off of this album contains his personal favorite performance that he's ever put down to tape. Hello, my name is Ian, and welcome to my YouTube channel. So with the delay of the Jethro Tull Christmas album box set, I got to thinking, up until this point, the Jethro Tull multi-disc box sets, which include multi-channel mixes, live material, and studio outtakes, have followed a chronological release schedule, usually around some sort of anniversary. With the Christmas album, this is the first time we've jumped ahead. We've basically gone from Broadsword and the Beast in 1982 and skipped forward a few decades to 2003. Now, this to me leaves us open to addressing some other albums that might fall on a particular anniversary. I started kind of reminiscing about the first time and only time that I saw Jethro Tull. And that would have been in November of 1995. And I started thinking, my God, 1995, that's 30 years ago. This is the sort of thing that record companies love to do with these box sets, is grab onto some sort of meaningful anniversary. And as you can see here, I still have my ticket from that show. I was very young. I won't tell you how young I was because I'll date myself, but I was very young for this. And it was something of a formative experience that sort of shaped my interest in music. And I'll show you another cool thing from that era is this Roots to Branches ball cap, which is one of my favorite. This is one of my favorite merch items ever. So you can tell that I absolutely adore this album. And I feel that in a lot of ways, it's not been well represented. There's only been one reissue of this album. It was in 2006, and I have it here. It's a remastered copy. But I thought that I would take the time to record a video because this would have been the week that I would have reviewed the Christmas album, to talk about speculation, maybe what we might see from a potential 30th anniversary Roots to Branches box set. And if I'm lucky enough and there's somebody from the label or the management or even Ian Anderson himself who comes across this video, I'm hoping that maybe they might think that this sort of thing would be worthwhile, that there might be some interest. And I would love to see the comments kind of represent that. I'd love to see some feedback talking about if you're interested in this. So I'm going to start by talking about the Roots to Branches record a little bit. This is my copy from 30 years ago. I was a kid when this came out. Again, I was very young. I remember that my dad picked me up from my grandparents, and he had 2 copies of this. He gave me this album, and this is the one that I still have to this day. So this is a priceless artifact for me, and so is this hat and ticket. And I imagine that, there are probably a lot of people who share a certain nostalgia for this album. Because with Crest of a Knave, which came out in the late 80s, 87, that marked a shift in Jethro Tull's music, maybe away from progressive rock and more toward kind of hard rock. And this is exemplified by the fact that they won a Grammy for a hard rock heavy metal performance at this time. And it seemed like the albums that followed, Rock Island and Catfish Rising, were going for more of a kind of rootsy blues. Let's go back to the very early days of the band and kind of what influenced us in the first place. And by the time you get to 95's Roots to Branches, which is a clever title, I think, because it's like we've spent the last couple of albums exploring our roots for the first time in decades, and now we're going to branch out. Now we're going to show what we've learned in the interim. And I think that this is a really fascinating album because you see Middle Eastern influences come back. And this is an influence that dates back to the Stand Up album from 1969. And I think this is the first time that Tull had really explored those influences in a really long time. This album, I think, is really strong. And it sees Anderson returning to the theme of religion with songs like Roots to Branches. You see influence of his trips to India in songs like Beside Myself. But I think this is also a return of the more progressive, daring, and ferocious playing that the band really hadn't done since maybe in 1980. Like I almost see this as like a continuation of that sort of thing. Really strong instrumental prowess and kind of letting the band go off the hook a little bit. And, I think this is also an example of something that's very rare in Tull music, especially after the late 60s. And that there's a tiny bit of improvisation on this album. Songs like Dangerous Veils have just a little moment there at the end where it seems like the band are allowed to let loose, and it's really exciting. It feels like something they just cut live in the studio. I know people criticize the last 3 songs because the first 8 or so are a certain kind of Tull music, like I said, very progressive influenced. And then what you have is these last 3 songs are more gentle ballads. Now, At Last Forever is one of the handful of Tull songs that can actually make me cry because it deals directly with the subject of death and grief. And Stuck in the August Rain, this is such a perfect melancholy Tull track. And there's a line in this that takes me back to Rover, the song from Heavy Horses. So there's a verse where Anderson sings, "I'm single-minded in my gloom. I appear to revel in this darkened room, but I'm still stuck in the August rain, stuck out in the cloudburst once again." And this takes me back again to Rover with a very similar verse. "I'm simple in my sadness, resourceful in remorse. Then I'm down straining at the lead, holding on a windward course." To me, this is a return to a certain beautiful melancholy that had been missing from Tull for decades. And I didn't mention it, but the playing is top shelf. I think that this is Doane Perry's strongest work as a drummer. And he reminds me a lot of Pat Mostellato of King Crimson here. I love what the new guy brings, Andy Giddings, who went on to become one of Tull's long-standing keyboardists. To me, Andy Giddings is like a combination of John Evan and Dee Palmer with a little sprinkling of Peter John Vitesse. And I haven't had a chance to talk too much about 80s Tull, but I'm a huge fan of Peter John Vitesse and huge defender of what he brought to the band. So I like that Andy Giddings was a keyboardist who was able to bridge all the different eras together and could cover a lot of variety in his playing and arrangements. You have 2 bass players here. Dave Pegg appears on a couple of tracks, and Steve Bailey on a few others. Steve Bailey was a friend of Doane Perry's, and he doesn't appear on any other Jethro Tull albums. Of course, the bass duties were handled by Jonathan Noyce on tour, who would go on to become another long-standing member of Jethro Tull. I haven't mentioned Martin Barre yet. I do think this is one of his strongest appearances. At this point, he knew how to weave in and out of the keyboard sounds, and I feel like he's applying a lot of what he learned playing with the likes of Eddie Jobson and Peter John Vitesse over the course of the last decade or so. And he's able to weave those rhythm parts in and out. Martin has always been like a hybrid of a rhythm and lead guitar player. And I think his arrangement choices are nothing short of genius. Ian Anderson, of course, the band's leader and songwriter and flautist and acoustic guitarist, brings some of his finest flute playing ever, I think, on this album. You hear the bamboo flute on the title track, and those passages are breathtaking. You may not know this, but I am a flute player, so I am sensitive to these sort of things, and I think he's just stellar on tracks like this. Also songs like Valley. Like, I think his flute playing is phenomenal on that. His singing is a little bit weakened. We are kind of entering in to the point in the band's history where his voice is on the decline. But I feel like he uses it well. And there's a track like Wounded, Old, and Treacherous, which I think offended a lot of fans back in the day because Ian does this kind of Frank Zappa-esque speak singing. It's kind of a little bit like Dynamo Hum or something like that, although obviously not as bawdy in its humor. But a lot of people were upset at the time saying, oh my God, Jethro Tull is rapping. And that's clearly not the case. I hear this more of like a Frank Zappa or even Captain Beefheart thing. And I love the wordplay in this song. And again, like, this song contains some of the best instrumental workouts of the entire record. So what could a remix package, a anniversary package of the Roots to Branches album bring? First off, I wanted to mention that the production on this album is not my favorite. It's well captured. It's very well recorded. The instruments have a very lively and full sound to them, especially the drums. You can tell that it's very well captured, but there's something to the EQ and mixing which kind of negates that for me. And it often comes off a little thin. There's not a lot of bass presence. Like, you can't really hear much of what Dave Pegg or Steve Bailey are doing. That seems to bleed over into the other instruments, like especially whenever Martin Barre has any kind of like heavy driving distorted electric guitar, it sounds kind of weak to me. Kind of thin, and the drums really don't have any bottom end presence. The toms don't. Oftentimes the high end of the record is a little bit shrill, especially on some of the flute passages, which is a real shame. Now, there was a remaster, as I mentioned previously, from 2006, and I did have a chance to listen to this last night in preparation, and I feel like this remaster does address a lot of the issues that I'm talking about. However, it does this through a little bit heavy-handed use of compression. It's not bad. If this were the only version of the record that I'd ever heard, I probably wouldn't mind it that much. But comparing it to the 95 version, I definitely can hear more compression. Now, the result of this is that it does bring the bass up in the mix. You do hear more bass presence and the actual notes that are being played, which I really appreciate. I also think that there was some attempt to reduce the EQ. So it's not quite as shrill. There's not as much high end coming through, and it feels much more natural. It's not a new mix, which is a shame, because I think that a new mix would address a lot of these issues without the need to compress it. And one of the overriding issues that I have with this album is that the drums have very bright reverb. The rest of the instruments sound kind of dull, and the drums have this very bright reverb that actually, I think, takes away from their clarity. Like, it's kind of hard to tell what Doane is doing a lot of the times. And that's a shame, because, as I said before, I think this is Doane's best performance on a Tull record. So I think having somebody like, I guess it would be Bruce Sword, come in and do new Dolby Atmos and 5.1 and stereo mixes of this album would really reveal a lot of the texture that's here, and would hopefully make it a more not only dynamic record, but give it more guts, give it more punch, more oomph, because it's sorely lacking from this. And I do think that all the overdubs and arrangement choices would make this an absolutely amazing multi-channel experience. And I think that it might open up this album to a lot of people who may have discounted it before now. Now, let's talk about some more potential extras. So there are 5 confirmed unreleased songs from these sessions, and they were confirmed by Don Perry in the 90s, back in the 90s in a New Day magazine. And I most likely still have that copy around here somewhere where I could refer back to that. But I remember reading where Don said that one of the songs that was left off of this album contains his personal favorite performance that he's ever put down to tape. I want to hear those outtakes. And I would love it if the trend was continued to remix the outtakes in multi-channel as well. Because if there's one kind of issue that I have with this record, it's another Harry's Bar, the last song on the album. I think it's kind of a whimper to end the record on, and it sounds like it could have been an outtake on Catfish Rising or really any of the post Crest of a Knave albums. And I'm not sure it really fits with this album. So I would love to hear what else was recorded during those sessions, because I'm guessing that there's maybe 1 or 2 really interesting songs of those 5 that could reveal, what might have been. I'm not interested in like revisionist history or anything like that, but I am interested in what might have been. I've dreamed of hearing those 5 tracks for decades now. And I think it's time to open up the vaults and hear those. What else? So as I mentioned before, I saw the tour, back in 95. So I think that, a live performance that's been well recorded, well mixed, would be great. And I've heard bootlegs. There's also the Santiago, Chile video, which was released on Around the World Live. Anderson's vocals are not great on this performance. And it makes me wonder what else is out there? What else is been tucked away from that tour? Because it was a great tour. That was the tour where, and I mentioned the A connection, but that's the tour where there was no opening act. Martin Barr was the opening act. Martin and Jonathan Noyce, Don Perry, and Andy Giddings were the opening act. And they played a wonderful A medley of songs like Black Sunday and Filingdale Flyer. I would love to have a well-mixed version of just that medley. But I would also love to hear the Roots to Branches songs included because, there is a good smattering of Roots to Branches material on the Santiago, Chile video, but we don't get Wounded, Old, and Treacherous. And I know we're talking about going back 30 years when I was very small seeing this, but I still remember hearing that song live. Like whenever that song comes on, Wounded, Old, and Treacherous, for some reason it takes me right back to seeing it to this day. It's a core memory that hopefully never leaves me. And that's one of the songs that I would like to revisit in good sound quality. Give us a remix of the album, give us a show with a new mix, and give us some studio outtakes. I think that would be a wonderful box set and would be a day one pre-order for me. I would jump on that so quickly. Now, I'm going to lose the cap because we're going to switch to another record for just a moment. Obviously, you're going to see the thumbnail for this, so you know that I'm going to talk about this, but kind of an obvious choice as an extra for a Roots to Branches 30th anniversary box set would be to include Ian Anderson's second solo album, Divinities, 12 Dances with God. Now, this was released several months before Roots to Branches in the spring of 95. And this is a highly, highly overlooked catalog item. And it's easy to see why, because it was quite a departure for the time, especially considering Ian Anderson's first solo album was Walk into Light, which was more like a bridge between Broadsword and the Beast and Under Wraps. This album, I think, is very much a departure from what came before, especially like Catfish Rising, which is more like a blues thing. Ian Anderson actually took flute lessons in the early 90s, so his flute playing took a major leap between 91 and 95. And this was an exploration of not only religion as a topic, and that was the first time that Ian had explored religious topics since the early 70s with like Aqualung and A Passion Play. So these are 12 pieces that deal with different religious ideologies, but it's also ostensibly a classical work, or even the dreaded New Age. And what I mean by this is that it's completely instrumental. Ian Anderson's flute is the main instrument, and oh man, I said that Roots to Branches had some of the best flute playing on it. I really think this is the album here that has Ian Anderson's best flute work. Just check out the opening track, In a Stone Circle, where he's playing those overtones, which is starting the note with like a lower octave fingering and blowing it up to the next octave. This is very hard stuff to do. This is like, Gabriel Fauré stuff. And the way he does it with such tone and control is beautiful. The opening seconds of this album are just awe-inspiring as a flute player, especially. I wouldn't call this a perfect album. There are a few tracks that I think are lesser and maybe drift too far into the New Age territory, but there's a handful of songs here, and I'm going to list them off, and you're going to say, well, hey, that's like most of the album. There are a handful of songs here that are just magnificent, and I'll just do a quick run through. In a Stone Circle, as I mentioned before, Inside of the Minaret, In a Black Box, In the Grip of Stronger Stuff, which was played on tour when Jethro Tull went out. I would even point to In the Moneylender's Temple, and In Defense of Faiths, In Afrique, and finally in the Times of India, Bombay Valentine. All of these pieces are just phenomenal and contain some of Ian Anderson's finest melodic writing. Now, it's not all him. Andy Giddings contributes, I would say, about half of the material that you're hearing here through his arrangements, both for keyboard, and there are a number of acoustic instruments here too, strings, woodwinds like oboe, and it's a nice mixture of kind of very old world sounds and typically classical sounds with more new agey keyboard textures. And 30 years on, I can't help but listen to this and think, I kind of wish Ian Anderson had continued in this direction. I would loved it if he would have gone in a primarily instrumental direction. The tour for this album had the Divinities album played in its entirety in the first half, and then the second half, he went out with Andy Giddings, Jonathan Noyes, and Doane Perry, in addition to some extra musicians to fill out some of the tones, and they played old Tull material. And I think that this approach might have saved Anderson's voice in the long run. But it's kind of a shame that this album didn't catch on commercially, because I think had it caught on commercially, he may have gone in that direction and saved some of his voice for later decades. We almost got that last year with Rock Flute, because Rock Flute was originally supposed to be an entirely instrumental album. And I would honestly say I'm not a big fan of Rock Flute, but had it been instrumental, it might have been the best thing that he had done since Divinities and Roots to Branches and would have fit in like a nice little trilogy. So I think it's a real shame that that didn't happen. And I know that there's a new Tull record coming, and a part of me is kind of, fingers crossed. I'd love to see an entirely instrumental Tull record. I just think that would be beautiful. But back to my hypothetical Roots to Branches box set. Include Divinities and do an Atmos mix of this. I think that would be a treat to hear this music. It would be a nice companion piece also to the War Child box set, because that's another album that contains a lot of orchestral outtakes from the abandoned film. And that's honestly what this kind of takes me back to. But you could also very easily include a show from this tour in its entirety and make a really nice big, this would be like Broadsword and the Beast size box set, but it would be worth it, I think, to have this material in our collections. Because if you look at the recently released 8314 vinyl box set, there is an extra live disc that does have material from this tour. So apparently recordings do exist in the vaults. Please make this happen. That's really exciting to me that anything from this tour got released. I would love to see a show released in its entirety. That would be just the perfect thing to wrap up a Roots to Branches box set. All right, so that's my thoughts on the Roots to Branches hypothetical 30th anniversary box set. Let me know yours. Are you crazy like me? Would you run out? Well, you don't have to run out anymore, but would you pre-order that? If it were announced tomorrow, a Roots to Branches 30th anniversary box set with newly created Dolby Atmos mixes, live material, outtakes, the Divinities album, Divinities Live, would you buy it? Let me know in the comments if this excites you as much as it excites me. In a perfect world, next year, we'd get this and Under Wraps with Walk in Delight, and I would be thrilled. That would check off such a major part of my Tull wish list. I would just be over the moon if something like that were to happen. So let me know. What do you think? And don't forget also to subscribe to the channel because, it's going to be a little while. It's going to be about 3 weeks. But on December 20th, the reissue of the Christmas album is coming out, and I do plan to review it. So if you want to keep tabs on my upcoming Jethro Tull reviews, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. But until then, once again, my name's Ian, and thank you for joining me. It's been real fun. Bye-bye.